He thought he could control me. One secret, one threat, and he believed I'd crumble under the pressure. But blackmail only works if you stay silent, and I wasn't about to stay silent. Instead, I flipped the script and turned the tables on him. What about you, friends? Have you ever had someone try to use information, gossip, or even lies to control you? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to know. Today's video is about how I was blackmailed at work, and how in the end the trap he set for me became the one he fell into himself. Stick around, hit subscribe, and let's dive in. I never thought I'd be the kind of man someone could blackmail. I lived quietly, worked steadily, and kept my head down. 18 years in the same company taught me the value of minding my business and keeping my record clean. But trouble has a way of finding you even when you don't go looking. It started small. A colleague named Victor began hovering around my desk more than usual. Victor was charming to some, but to me he always seemed slippery. He was the kind of guy who knew everyone's secrets, who listened more than he spoke, then used what he learned like a weapon. One Friday afternoon, he pulled me aside. His smile was too wide, his voice too smooth. "I know something about you," he said softly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let's just say, the higher-ups might not be too happy if they heard it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But don't worry, I can keep it quiet, for a price." My stomach twisted. Blackmail, straightforward and ugly. The thing was, his so-called secret wasn't even true. It was a twisted half-truth, spun from a mistake I'd already corrected weeks earlier. But Victor didn't care about facts. He cared about leverage. He wanted me to do his work, to cover his deadlines, to fix his reports, to let him coast while I carried the weight. "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours," he said with that sly grin. For a few days I played along, just enough to keep him off my back. I stayed late finishing his projects, all while he bragged about his successes. The resentment burned in me like acid. At night I told my wife. She looked at me across the kitchen table, eyes sharp. "You can't let him win. If you give in now, he'll own you forever." She was right. And deep down, I knew I couldn't let Victor control me. But I also knew something about men like him. The harder you push, the slipperier they get. If I wanted to stop him, I had to be smart. I had to turn the tables, so I started paying closer attention, watching him the way he had watched others. I saved emails, tracked deadlines, noted the corners he cut. Piece by piece, I built a quiet case, a mirror he wouldn't see coming. Because if Victor thought he was the only one holding cards, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. From that day on, every move Victor made became part of my quiet investigation. He thought he was clever, that his threats had me cornered. He strutted through the office with that smug grin, tossing files onto my desk, whispering, "Remember our little agreement." Out loud, he'd joke with the team, bragging about deadlines he crushed. But I was watching. I saved every email he sent me, the ones where he tried to shift his tasks onto my plate. I documented every missed deadline, every half-finished report. I even kept track of the nights I stayed late, finishing work that was supposed to be his. At first, it felt strange, like I was building a secret diary of his failures. But slowly, the picture became clear. Victor wasn't just lazy, he was incompetent. He was skating by on charm and manipulation, and I had the proof. One evening, after most of the office had gone home, I walked past his desk. A file sat half open on his screen. Curious, I glanced closer, and what I saw nearly made me laugh. He had copied whole sections of another colleague's report and pasted them into his own. Plagiarism, plain as day. I snapped a quick photo with my phone, another card in my hand. At home, my wife listened as I laid it all out, the emails, the missed deadlines, the plagiarism. She nodded slowly, a smile tugging at her lips. "So he wanted to play dirty," she said. "Now you've got the dirt." Still, I didn't rush. Men like Victor thrived on drama. If I confronted him too soon, he'd wriggle free, twist the story, maybe even make me look like the villain. No, I needed to let him dig his hole deeper. And he did. A week later, he cornered me again near the break room. "You're doing good work, buddy," he said with a wink. "Keep this up, and maybe I'll keep that little secret of yours buried." That was the moment I realized something important. He had no intention of stopping. He thought he had me for life. So I decided it was time to strike. I compiled everything into a neat folder. Emails, photos, timelines, Even a few screenshots of him bragging in messages about how he made the old guy do his work. Piece by piece, it told the story not of me, but of him. A manipulator, a liar, a fraud. The question now was how to reveal it. I could go straight to HR, but I knew how these things worked. Sometimes they brushed it off. Sometimes they protected the smoother talker. If I went in too early, Victor might spin it back on me. So instead, I waited for the perfect stage. A moment when he couldn't wriggle out, when the truth would shine too bright for anyone to deny. And that moment came sooner than I expected. At the next department meeting, Victor was set to present a major report to our manager and a visiting executive. He strutted in, shoulders back, ready to impress. What he didn't know was that the report he was about to claim as his own was the very one I had finished for him, and I had every piece of proof to show it. The conference room was buzzing that morning. Our manager sat at the head of the table, a senior executive beside him. Everyone else filed in, laptops open, ready to take notes. This was an important meeting, one that could shape the department's reputation for months. Victor walked in like he owned the place. He slapped his folder down, smoothed his tie, and flashed that grin. "I've got everything under control," he boasted as he connected his laptop to the projector. I sat 2 seats away, my own folder resting quietly on the table. My heart thudded in my chest, but my face stayed calm. Victor launched into his presentation, clicking through slides filled with numbers, charts, and summaries. He spoke with confidence, tossing around phrases like "my analysis" and "my findings." But as I watched, I couldn't help but notice how familiar those charts looked. Every line, every detail, it was my work. Halfway through, the executive raised a question. "These numbers, can you walk us through how you arrived at them?" Victor hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then fumbled into a vague explanation. My stomach tightened. This was it, the crack in his armor. I leaned forward slightly. "Actually," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I can clarify that." The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. I slid my folder across the table and opened it. Inside were my notes, my drafts, my time-stamped emails. "These figures," I continued, "came from an analysis I completed 2 weeks ago. Here's the original report with the audit trail. You'll notice it matches the numbers in Victor's slides exactly." Gasps rippled around the table. The executive's brow furrowed as he compared the documents. Our manager's face darkened. Victor stammered, Wait, no, I collaborated with him. That's why it looks the same." I shook my head slowly. "If that were true, why did you email me at midnight last week asking for help finishing your numbers? And why," I added, pulling out a printed screenshot, "did you message someone else bragging that you had me doing your work?" The color drained from Victor's face. He opened his mouth, closed it again, searching for words that wouldn't come. The executive set his pen down sharply. "This is very serious," he said. His voice was calm, but the weight of it made the air heavy. "Plagiarism, misrepresentation, this is not leadership material." Our manager looked from Victor to me, then back again. Finally, he spoke, his tone clipped. "Victor, step outside. We'll deal with this later." Victor rose slowly, his shoulders slumped, the smugness gone. He shot me a look as he walked past, a mix of anger and fear, but I met his eyes without flinching. When the door closed behind him, the executive turned back to me. "Thank you for bringing this forward. It takes courage to stand up in a situation like this." I nodded, but inside I felt more than courage. I felt relief. For weeks, Victor had tried to control me with lies, with threats, and now, in front of everyone, his game had collapsed. The meeting moved on, but the shift in the room was undeniable. My colleagues glanced at me with new respect, and I realized something. I hadn't just defended myself. I had exposed the truth. Victor thought he was holding the cards, but now everyone knew. I had been holding the winning hand all along. The hours after that meeting were some of the longest of my career. Word spread fast. Too fast. By the end of the day, nearly everyone in the department had heard what happened. Victor had been exposed, caught red-handed presenting work that wasn't his. People's reactions shifted overnight. Those who once laughed at Victor's jokes now avoided his desk. The whispers that once followed me through the halls now followed him instead. Later that week, HR called me in. I'll admit, my stomach knotted as I walked into that office. Even though I knew the truth was on my side, part of me feared they'd twist things, sweep it under the rug, or worse, try to blame both of us. But the meeting was different than I expected. The HR manager had the folder I'd submitted, filled with proof. My direct manager sat beside her, stone-faced. She began calmly. "We've completed our review. We've compared your reports, the timestamps, and the correspondence you provided." She glanced at me and nodded. "There is no doubt this work is yours." Relief flooded through me, but she wasn't finished. She turned her gaze to Victor, who sat across the table, pale and fidgeting. "Victor, the evidence shows a clear pattern of misconduct, offloading responsibilities, misrepresentation of work, and attempted intimidation of a colleague." Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Finally, he muttered, "It was just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstandings don't come with screenshots," my manager cut in sharply. The HR manager continued, her voice firm. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." The room went silent. Victor's shoulders slumped. He glanced at me, but I didn't see anger in his eyes anymore, only defeat. He gathered his things slowly, then left without a word. When the door closed, my manager turned to me. For a moment, the sternness faded, and I saw something else: respect. "You handled this with patience and professionalism," he said. "That couldn't have been easy." I nodded, still processing it all. "He thought he could control me," I said quietly. But the truth was always stronger. The next few days were strange. Coworkers stopped by my desk to offer quiet words of support. One admitted, "I knew something was off with Victor, but I didn't know how to say it." Another said, "I'm glad you stood up. You saved more than just yourself. You saved the whole team." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me. If I had stayed silent, Victor would have kept leeching off others, maybe even climbed higher, leaving more damage behind him. By turning the tables, I hadn't just cleared my own name. I'd protected the workplace I'd given years of my life to. That Friday, as I packed up to leave for the weekend, I glanced at Victor's empty desk. The space looked smaller somehow, stripped of its arrogance. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The blackmail, the threats, the sleepless nights, they were over. But more than that, I had proven something important. You don't beat a bully by bowing your head. You beat him by standing tall, gathering the truth, and letting it speak louder than his lies. And as I walked out into the cool evening air, I knew one thing for certain. Victor had tried to own me. But in the end, I had owned the moment. The following weeks settled into a new kind of calm. Without Victor's constant shadow hovering over me, the office felt lighter. People carried themselves differently. Meetings ran smoother, projects stayed on track, and the tension that once lingered like smoke in the air began to fade. For the first time in months, I could walk into work without that knot in my stomach. No whispered threats, no sly glances from across the room. Just work. Plain, honest work. The way it should have been all along. But even as life returned to normal, I carried the weight of what had happened. Late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the quiet house, and think about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had given in to Victor's demands, even once, he would have had me chained forever. If I had stayed silent, he might have risen higher, his lies spreading wider, poisoning more than just my career. The thought chilled me. Because that's the nature of blackmail. It feeds on silence. It thrives on fear. And it only ends when someone has the courage to cut the rope. One afternoon, Daniel, one of my younger colleagues, stopped by my desk. He hesitated, then said, "I heard about everything that happened. I just wanted to say, thanks. For standing up." I raised an eyebrow. "Thanks?" He nodded. "Victor cornered me once too. Tried to make me do part of his workload. I brushed him off, but honestly, I didn't know how to fight back. Watching you turn the tables, it showed me it can be done." His words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about my dignity anymore. It was about showing others that you don't have to let bullies win. Sometimes fighting back isn't loud or flashy. It's patient, quiet, and strategic. Over time, the respect I gained from my coworkers became something I hadn't anticipated. People asked for my opinion more, trusted me with projects, looked to me for guidance. My manager even hinted that leadership opportunities might be on the horizon. But beyond the promotions or recognition, what mattered most was the peace inside me. Knowing I hadn't bowed to fear. Knowing I had chosen integrity over convenience. One evening, as I packed up my things, I glanced once more at the empty desk where Victor had sat. For months, that desk had been a reminder of pressure, of manipulation, of sleepless nights. Now it was just empty, a space where a lesson had been learned. I smiled faintly, turned off the light, and walked out. Because in the end, it wasn't just about turning the tables on Victor. It was about proving something to myself, that no one, no matter how sly or threatening, could take away my dignity unless I let them. And I never let him. And that, friends, is how I turned the tables. Victor thought he could own me with lies and threats, but in the end, the truth was louder than his whispers. Blackmail thrives on fear and silence. Once you shine a light on it, it crumbles. This experience taught me something I'll never forget. No one can take away your dignity unless you hand it to them. Standing firm, gathering proof, and refusing to bend was the only way forward. And it worked. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's games, remember this story. You don't have to fight dirty. You just have to fight smart. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me again here on Office Revenge Tales for the next story.